It's one of those videos. Didn't want to have to go and make something like this, but here we are, exposing the secret of athleticism, Mr. Shang-Chi, I think it is called. Now, just some background of why. I'm going to take you to Instagram. Obviously, you've probably seen a lot of his stuff all over Instagram and various social media, pushing the fascia narrative, very similar to other training cults. Now, let me take you to the background first. I'll make it a little easier. So there's this video here, basically talking about Jonathan Edwards hitting a triple jump PR or record after basically spending 6 months bed rest with illness. Whether he did or not, I don't know, but that's not the point. I just want to jump into the concept. Now, this is just going to be raw, unedited, me talking and showing you through a few different things. But what's really interesting is, why can't I load the comments now? Nice. Anyways, in the comments, I mentioned that this potentially could be explained muscularly, because here he's talking about it's only fascia due to the overshoot phenomenon. And he's just gone on and on about honestly showing a very low level understanding of athletic performance and anatomy and physiology, which is honestly on par for people like this who are just selling a system and a narrative. So, I mean, even his references here are just about about fascia mechanisms, not about the actual detraining process and what happens. So that's what we are going to dive into. So let me pull that up. Really cool phenomenon, and it's called the overshoot phenomenon. This was a huge influence into my master's research and areas of study. And I'm going to run through some of this to potentially explain some of the reasons behind why someone could take 6 months off and do nothing and come back and hit PRs in an event like triple jump. Now, this is going to be very niche specific to certain sports. It has to be a pure speed-based sport. If it's, for example, a strength sport, even combat sports to an extent, may not have the same effect because of the change in muscle fiber type and the detraining of other qualities. Now, we need to remember that unlike what secret of athleticism and these kind of training cults portray, nothing happens in isolation. These guys like to pin down performance or pain or anything down to one thing, one mechanism. It is this thing that causes X, Y, Z, without even thinking about the multifactorial and complex nature of humans and athletic performance. No one has all the answers. And if they're saying they have all the answers, like fascia is the answer, that should be an instant red flag. So we're going to run through one of the reasons why potentially this was able to happen. Now, in my opinion, fascia connective tissues probably did play a role. I am not dogmatic in saying something does not work at all. There is definitely room for this idea that fascia, I mean, even connective tissue, which is already something that is, I'm going to say proven, but is a factor in performance. Of course, we can talk about tendons, elasticity, being able to provide elastic energy, generate more force, etc. So there's a lot of things going on. But when we get down to the muscular level, which was completely discounted, which is interesting, we can actually look at this overshoot research. So first one, this is probably one of the original papers by Anderson and Agard. Love this one, a myosin heavy chain type 2X overshoot in human skeletal muscle. Now, they've done a follow-up study I'm going to hit you with after this, but what's most interesting is they essentially took 3 months of heavy resistance training with 3 months of detraining. And with detraining, I mean like they stopped lifting completely. So after that, what you'll see here as I scroll down is this graph here. So we have white bars as pre-training, post-training in the middle, and then we have post-detraining. So essentially baseline, 3 months after training, 3 months after not training. And we see that this is a very, what would you call it, typical graph of what typically happens when we see high volumes or just volumes of strength training. So if you're going to the gym regularly, this middle part here is kind of what you're looking at in terms of how your muscle fibers or your type 2A muscle fibers are looking. So we see this increase in proportion of type 2A, and we see a decrease in proportion of type 2X. Now, our body shifts muscle fiber type towards this, I guess you could say, more hybrid middle fiber type. Again, we have many fiber types in between that are hybrids, for example, type 2A/2X. But just to make it easier, we're looking at just these pure muscle fiber types here. So type 2As increasing the more oxidative fast twitch fiber type, so you're a little more fatigue resistant, whereas your pure speed-based fibers, you lose a lot of them relatively quickly here. But what's really interesting is that after 3 months of detraining, you see the opposite happen. You see a large decrease in type 2A, but you see this big increase, what they call the overshoot, in type 2X muscle fiber. And if you can, the most important thing you can see here is that it is much higher than pre-training values. And this is why they coin it the overshoot. Now, why this happens, I don't think anyone really knows. I mean, we could speculate and think about maybe, your uncle in a past life in the caveman days, resting for months on end before going hunting for something and needing that speed. Who knows? But regardless, this thing happens when we detrain after resistance training. So if we go to their follow-up study, if you, I'd highly recommend you read these papers if you're interested in this kind of stuff, because these two are really the backbone of this, I guess you could say, theory here. So this one actually they followed up and actually looked at performance measures within this. So they still looked at the overshoot and muscle fiber type. And then they looked at the actual performance on an isokinetic dynamometer, which is essentially just like isolating a limb and doing leg extensions and leg curls. So we see that muscle cross-sectional area, we can just call it muscle size, increases and then decreases post-training back to baseline. So essentially we just get back to normal in terms of muscle size. But what's really interesting is this one right here. I'm going to zoom in for you. Force and velocity curve. So we see post-training with the triangles here. We see greater force and most importantly, greater velocities at higher forces. And if you know the equation for power, you know that it's force times velocity equals more power. And then we see the same thing here, more power at high, look at this, at high velocities. And look at this, same thing here with our overshoot. So we can infer that, hey, this overshoot phenomenon in type 2X significantly affects unloaded, or in this instance, unloaded leg extensions for power velocity and force velocity. Now, whether this translates into, I guess you'd say, sporting tasks, it's up for debate. But regardless, we see, look at this, the acceleration of the joint here post detraining. So we see these huge improvements in velocity, speed and force at high velocities, which is obviously a very important component, especially for an event like triple jump. Well, I mean, because this is a combat sports channel, sports like combat sports, being able to produce high forces at high velocities becomes very important. Now, if we're going to go down the anecdotal route, which obviously these guys love to do, I mean, they claim everything from Zhang Wei Li's performance based on standing on the toes in training or something like that, even though I'm pretty sure she trained at Bangtao with Coach Woody and Owen Scullion, who was on the podcast too, from Bangtao. But regardless, claim what you want. I lost my train of thought here. If we're looking anecdotally, the Great Britain cycling team, I think it was the 2000 Olympics, anecdotally implemented an approach like this, and they cleaned up the track cycling gold medals. And we can even look at the mechanical determinants of 100 meter sprint performance. So JB and Pierre here, they were on my paper back in my master's. I had JB on the podcast too a while ago if you wanted to listen to that. But if you just come down to this section right here. So correlations between the mechanical variables, which are essentially like force, speed, power, etc. And then on 100 meter sprint performance. So we see very high correlations with maximal power output for speed, 100 meter speed, and 4-second distance. So essentially acceleration. So, we're looking at faster approaching velocities in that triple jump, and then being able to ideally turn that momentum into going airborne and jumping further. So that pretty much sums up some of the research behind the muscular determinants, or at least mechanisms behind maybe why he was able to hit PRs with a lot of time off. The other thing to consider is this idea around, well, not this idea. The other thing to consider is what moves limbs. And while fascia and connective tissue play a role, what moves limbs is the shortening of muscle. And you can't get away from it. You cannot isolate connective tissue and fascia away from muscular contraction. Everything works together, just like we cannot isolate anaerobic alactic activity from aerobic activity. Everything works together and everything is working all the time. Same thing as we can't isolate strength, power, hypertrophy qualities in our training. Everything is done at the same time. We can certainly bias areas of training. For example, we can bias more quote unquote connective tissue training through plyometrics and being more reactive, or more muscular training by potentially squatting something heavy off the pins. But everything is always working together. And if we talk about what's moving limbs, we have muscle, which connects to tendon, which connects to bone. And this shortening is what moves our limbs. It is the contractile properties of the protein filaments within the muscle, and that is what shortens the muscle and allows us to generate force. We cannot just generate force through fascia and connective tissue itself, and not to any appreciable degree. That is there to help us with our movement. So hopefully that clears some things up here around this little video and reel. Honestly, just look out for red flags. Things like this you'll see all the time, where people will take performances from elite athletes and claim that they're doing their system, or they'll claim that they are a representation of their training system, even though they're not. I think some of the comments there show that that guy was power cleaning 140 kilos at 70 kg body weight. And if he was, that already goes against a lot of what these guys are saying in terms of their training and how they're built. So anyway, if you enjoyed this, please let me know down in the description. Probably going to get heaps of hate comments on this as well. That's completely fine, as long as it gets pushed out into the algorithm. Let's do it.